Good morning. Looks like we might be back to normal. We got the screens on. We got the microphone to work. Now, if we just get me to work, we'll be all set. Terry and I made a quick trip to the UP Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and we were in Grand Marais, and there's Sable Falls is up there. And I said, well, I want to take a picture of Sable Falls. So we pulled the parking lot, and we get out, and we start to go down the trail, and it says something about the falls, 500 feet. And I said, okay, that's not so bad. But then as you walk along that 500 feet, there's another sign that says, steps down, 168. Steps back up, 168. So Terry opted out not to go down. I went down about 3/4 of the way. I got far enough down that I got several pictures of it, but holy cow, I'm getting too old for this climbing around in the woods. Okay, we're in Nehemiah. We're at week 4, and last week we spent most of our time in chapter 2. Nehemiah finally makes it to Jerusalem, and when he gets there, there's near the end of chapter 2, there's 3 people that come into the story: Sanballat, Tobiah, and Gershom, and they're all against him. And last week, at the very end of the class, Ted, July, I don't know if it was a question or a statement or whether, why are these guys against the Jewish people? And I thought, oh. So I went home and I looked around to see if I could figure out who these guys are. Sometimes we talk about people in the Bible and we don't really know their background. Just all of a sudden their names pop up, they talk about them a little bit, and then you move on. So I looked up, when Nehemiah began rebuilding the walls in Jerusalem in 445 BC, of course, he met with this strong resistance from 3 individuals: Sanballat, Tobiah, and Gershom. And although Nehemiah did not record their titles, we know from extra biblical evidence that they were rulers in adjoining areas around Jerusalem, around Israel there. Sanballat was a governor of Samaria. Let's see, I think I got a slide here. So that's the Persian Empire during the time period that we're talking about. And earlier on, I'm going to back up just a little bit. Earlier on, we had talked about that Nehemiah was in Susa, which is over on to the right hand down. I put a red line underneath it. And speaking of those red lines, especially over in Jerusalem, last week, Nathan, I think it was, said something about making a straight line with a crooked stick. Well, I took my straight stick and made a crooked line under Jerusalem. So, but that was the journey that he made. Susa was where the king of, that was the winter headquarters. And so that was the trip that he took. And of course, he didn't go by the way the crow flies, because all that pink down there, I think, is all desert. So they went up and around. And when I saw that Mesopotamia and the Tigris and Euphrates River, it brought back memories of in school, and I don't remember if it was in elementary or it was middle school where we had, I don't know if it was geography or what it was, but they talk about the breadbasket of the world and where civilization started. I don't know if they still teach that or not. The way everything's gone goofy. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. So they were. Sanballat was the governor of Samaria, a province north of Judah. And I can't, let's see, okay, north of Judah. So he was the leading opponent of the Jews after the return from the captivity. And he tried to hinder Nehemiah in his work of rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. Sanballat's designation as the Horonite probably indicates the town of his origin, possibly Hornaim, a town of Moab near Zoar, situated along the route that the Assyrians followed when they invaded Israel, or Beth-horon in Ephraim near Jerusalem. In papyri found at the Jewish settlement in the Elephantine, Egypt, Sanballat is called the governor of Samaria. His daughter married one of the sons of Josada, the son of Ishleb, the high priest that we're going to talk about when we get to Nehemiah 13:28. Nehemiah viewed such a mixed marriage as a defilement of the priesthood, so he drove Josada away. Sanballat's opposition to Nehemiah's work may have stemmed from jealousy. He may have felt that his authority was threatened by the reawakening of the land of Judah. Now, Tobiah, the Tobiah family was well known in the 3rd century BC as powerful Jewish aristocrats living in the Transjordan. Papyrus letters of an Egyptian official named Zion, dated around 260 BC, mention a wealthy landowner, businessman, and tax collector named Tobias. It's an alternative spelling of Tobiah in the province of the Amorites. The ruins of Tobiah's family's palatial estate from the 2nd century BC, mentioned by Josephus, have been excavated 11 miles west of the modern Amman, Jordan. Now, kind of get a feel, if we take a modern day map and lay it over the area, you can see, Israel is just a little, compared to everything around them. You got Turkey way to the north, and Syria, and then Iraq and Iran, and Egypt over to the left. Saudi Arabia is all that pink stuff, all that desert. But so, and I can't remember, Jordan is just to the east of Israel. So that's where he was. That's where he was at. The family name is inscribed above 2 entrances to rock-cut halls on the estate. The Tobiah, or of Nehemiah's acquaintance, appears to have been governor of the province of Amman, east of Judah, in Transjordan. And then the third person that we talk about, Geshem, an inscription found in northwestern Arabia from the time of Nehemiah reads, Geshem, son of Sar and Abdi, governor of Dedan. A silver offering bowl uncovered in the eastern delta region of Egypt from the late 5th century BC bears the same name, stating, on this bowl, there's a saying on there, it says, that which Canu, son of Gershom, king of Kedar, offered to Hanalet. I'm having trouble with these names, but since Dedan and Kedar were tribal nations occupying the eastern desert, including Syria, northern Arabia, Sinai, and northern Egypt, Geshem must have been a powerful ruler who controlled a vast area. Arabs became dominant in the Transjordan from the Assyrian to the Persian periods. Sargon II of Assyria resettled some Arabs in Samaria in 715 BC. Classical sources reveal that the Arabs enjoyed a favored status under the Persians. And over in Nehemiah 4, verses 7 and 8, it says, but when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Amorites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. So the reasons that Sanballat and Tobiah opposed the Nehemiah were not basically religious, but they were more political. The authority of the Samaritan governor in particular was threatened by the arrival of Nehemiah, the new governor of Judah. The Arabs, led by Gresham, were probably afraid that Judah's strengthening under Nehemiah would cut into their lucrative trade enterprise, because they were on the main route. They controlled that main route for trade back during that time. So it was more of a political thing rather than a religious, why these three guys came together and to oppose Nehemiah during this time. Anybody any comment or questions about any of that? Okay. So getting back to Nehemiah. So we'd come to the end of chapter 2 in Nehemiah. So picking up, anyone can go through life as a destroyer. God has called his people to be builders. What an example Nehemiah is to us. So let's trace some of his so statements and see how God used him. In 2:4, Nehemiah says, so I prayed. And in verse 2:11, he says, so I came to Jerusalem. And in 18, it says, so they strengthened their hands for this good work. And in 4:6, so we rebuilt the wall. And in 24:21, so we continued the work. And 6:15, so the wall was finished. Were it not for the dedication and determination that came from his faith in a great God, Nehemiah never would have accepted the challenge or finished the work. He had never seen the verse, but what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15:8 was what kept him going. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. So no matter how difficult the task or how strong the opposition, be determined. He was determined. It is always too soon to quit. So now we move on to chapter 3 of the rebuilding of the wall. In Nehemiah 1 and 2, we saw that Nehemiah, at the height of power and influence in Persia, was a student of Scripture who interpreted life in light of the Bible, prayed for God to accomplish the purposes he laid out in the Bible, and took action to do what he could, to be used of the Lord in answer to his own prayers. The good hand of God was on Nehemiah, and Nehemiah traveled back to Jerusalem and called the Jews to rise up, to rebuild the gates and the walls of the city. In Nehemiah, we see a model of valor, and this valor exemplified by Nehemiah is a forward-looking Christ-likeness. Nehemiah was a student of the Scriptures. He was a prayer warrior, one who loved God and his people, who sought the good of God's people at great risk to himself, who showed great courage and great boldness, protection God's people and trusting God, and who lived for the high cause of God's kingdom. To all Christians, we say, let us follow Nehemiah's footsteps on the valiant path of Christ-likeness. Study the Bible, pray, and lay our life down to protect others. Nehemiah 3 shows the people's response to Nehemiah's call to action. And that call to action came in chapter 2 and verses 17 and 18. The chapter seems to be organized around the rebuilding of the gates, meaning chapter 3, and the references to those who worked next to those rebuilding gates perhaps account for the people who rebuilt the walls between the gates. Think of what this construction project entailed. They had to get the wood, they had the tools, and the labor. And we read of bolts and bars and beams in verse 3. The gates named would encircle the city of Jerusalem, beginning north of the temple and moving counterclockwise around the city. Kind of hard to see, but that's the city walls. The middle, the inner walls is where we're going to be talking about. It's a little darker. It's easier to see on my computer at home than it is on here. You have to get your binoculars out to see what's going on. Anyway, clockwise around the city. The geographical layout seems to provide the organizing principles for Nehemiah 3. Nehemiah faced a great challenge and had great faith in a great God, but he would have accomplished very little had there not been great dedication on the part of the people who helped him rebuild the wall. With a kind of humility that befits a godly leader, Nehemiah gave all the credit to the people when he wrote in 4:6. He says, "So we built the wall, for the people had a mind to work." The British humorist Jerome K. Jerome said, "I like work. It fascinates me. I can sit and look at it for hours." Sometimes I think that's the way my wife feels that I do it. She's not in here, is she? Okay. When it comes to the work of the Lord, there is no place for spectators or self-appointed advisors and critics, but there is always room for workers. Nehemiah was concerned about only one thing, the glory of God. Let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. That was out of 2:17. The Gentiles delighted in mocking their Jewish neighbors by pointing out the dilapidated condition of Jerusalem. After all, the Jews claimed that their capital city was beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth, as quoted from Psalms 48:2. And in Psalms 87:2, it says, the gates of Zion, more than all the dwellings of Jacob. If God loved Jerusalem so much, why were the walls in ruin and the gates burned? Why was the holy city a reproach? Why didn't the Jews do something? And of course, the rebuilding of the walls and setting up the gates also meant protection and security for the people. Jerusalem was surrounded by enemies, and it seemed foolish for the residents to improve their property when nothing was safe from invasion or plunder. And over the years, the citizens had become accustomed to their plight. Just like today, there are many people who are content to live with the status quo. Then Nehemiah arrives and on the scene and challenged them to rebuild the city to the glory of God. Nehemiah was a leader who planned his work and worked his plan. And the way he did it is an example for us to follow. 38 individual workers are named in this chapter, and 42 different groups are identified. There are also many workers whom Nehemiah did not name, whose labors were important, and each worker, named and anonymous, was assigned a place and a task. In 1 Corinthians 12 and 14, chapters 12 and chapter 14, Paul compared individual Christians to members of the human body. Each member is important, and each has a special function to perform. The people finished this difficult task because they obeyed the same leader, Nehemiah, kept their eyes on the same goal, and worked together for the glory of God. Neither the enemy outside the city nor the difficulties inside the city distracted them, for their God-given task. Like Paul, they said, this one thing I do. The word built is used 6 times in Nehemiah 3, which really means rebuilt. George Morrison, he has a book or something, Morning Sermons, published in London in 1931, says that for this restoration, no new material was needed. In the debris of the ruined masonry lay all the material required, and it seems to me that is always so when the walls of Zion are rebuilt. The word repair is used 35 times. It means to make strong and firm. Nehemiah wasn't interested in a quick fix, a whitewashed wall that would soon crumble. They were rebuilding to the glory of God, and therefore they did their best. The gates of Jerusalem had been destroyed by fire. Let's see.
Bill,
Yep.
before you leave this one here, there's 2 different walls shown on that. The darker one, if I'm understanding right, is the one that we're talking about Nehemiah building.
Correct.
So it's a much smaller one than the bigger one. Is there any idea how long that wall was? Was it
Probably, but I don't know if I, pardon me?
2 or 3, 4 miles?
I don't know.
It seems like I don't know either, but it seems like the larger wall, the present wall of the old city, is what it's called up there at the top. I heard somewhere that was 14 miles all the way.
The outer wall?
Yeah, the bigger one.
Okay.
And that's more Jerusalem as it grew later on, including to the temple was,
Yes.
and it's very narrow there. And that's partly because it's at the top of these hills that were running north and south. The larger part inside the old wall there was more where the people lived, I think.
Okay.
But it really wasn't that large, especially at the bottom end, you can see it's
Yeah,
quite
it's pretty
small.
narrow, yeah, it's pretty narrow. But,
Yeah.
yeah, this
So-
whole,
So,
this,
question,
yes.
I don't see the temple actually listed, how do you know that it's in that narrow part, and why don't they know where that temple was?
You know, as Terry was talking, I was looking down and I don't see the temple listed, you're right.
Well, maybe because it wasn't built at that time.
Well, temple was built first. Ezra, I mean, was
Yeah,
rebuilt.
okay.
It was rebuilt, because Ezra came back, he rebuilt the temple first, and then Nehemiah comes along, now he's gonna protect the city.
There is also an answer to that, Ted. There's 7 hills, okay? And most of the city was built on the top of the 7 hills. Zion was the bottom hill in that small area shown in the old wall. Zion was the bottom hill. Bottom means the one to the south, okay? And that's where the temple was built, and it's called the Temple Mount today. And it's still a very narrow place because it's on top of, there's drop-offs on both sides.
My question has to do more with, they seem to know where the house of some of these priests and other people stayed, et cetera, and some of the other buildings. It seems like the important one would be the place.
The temple?
Where it's not there. So there's gotta be some ambiguity somehow or another as to why they haven't put that in that picture.
I'm trying to remember where I copied that map, or that. Huh. I gotta go back, I gotta find out, I don't remember where I got that picture from. Oh, I think I went and Googled, and that map came up. But, so I don't know why the temple is not in it. And I didn't realize the temple wasn't marked in there until Terry said something, and you, about it. So I don't know where it's at. I guess so.
The other thing, in verse 13, I don't know if this gives us any sense of scale. It says they repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall, which was from the valley gate to the gum gate, so down there in the lower left-hand corner. I don't know if that was the full distance or if that was the amount that they all get repaired.
So that'd be around 1,800 to 2,000 feet.
Yeah.
My Bible says 500.
500, oh, yards.
1,500 feet.
But that was from which gate? From the,
Always at the very bottom,
okay,
and the valley is up.
This is about 1,500 feet in the margin or 450 meters.
So if you take that for 1,500 feet, and you do it all around the old wall, you would be well over a mile, maybe 2 miles or something
oh,
like that.
Valley Gate is way down there, okay.
Yeah.
From the Valley Gate, okay, so it's on that tip that goes down, the Valley Gate to the Gum Gate.
But if it's even 2 miles, that's a big, long wall. And there's one in here where it talks about that they had built it, and it was half up, which meant they had to go back and build a whole lot more higher, as time passed. But at the beginning, they were trying to build it at some distance up anyway.
Some of the walls must have been there already, because they talk more about rebuilding the gates, because the gates were burned, because they would have been made out of wood. The walls would not have, they would have been made out of stone, or some kind of masonry. And so I doubt if they burned, but they could have been knocked over. There might have been other holes. But I got a feeling that the biggest thing was securing the gates. And that's mostly what we're talking about here in chapter 3 as they moved along that. So a lot of that,
There's just an awful lot of Jews in the city anyway. That's why it talks about whole families that were enlisted to come out and build sections
Because didn't I say it was like, they did this in what, 52 days or something? Something that seemed like, it wasn't very long. I think I'll come against, I think I talked about it last week. I thought I mentioned it, maybe it's in here. But it was quite an undertaking, and everybody got busy. He must have been quite he encouraged those people and got them to get in gear and let's get this project going here. Okay, let's see.
Google says the perimeter of Nehemiah's wall was probably about 1.7 miles long. I don't know this.
Okay.
Somebody Google said that. Other Google people are stupid.
Yeah, in chapter 6:15, it says it took them 52 days.
Okay. My memory was good, 52 days.
But that was working a lot. And they had to guard the thing too. So they had to have a bunch of people that were not working because they had to have swords and spears and be ready in case somebody attacked them. That's getting ahead of where we're talking about right now.
Right.
The ways.
But I think earlier on, I had mentioned about the 52-day. I know it stuck in my head. You know, when you're working on this, and of course I work ahead, and so sometimes I remember stuff that I just worked on this week where this might have been written, this portion was written a while ago. So the gates of Jerusalem have been destroyed by fire. And so in Jeremiah 17:27 says, "But if you do not listen to me to keep the Sabbath day holy and not to bear a burden and enter by the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in its gates, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem and shall not be quenched." Lamentations 1:4, "The roads to Zion mourn, for none come to the festival. All her gates are desolate." So Nehemiah requisitioned timber from the king's forest and had new gates constructed. And we found that in 2:8 in Nehemiah. And put into place. And we're going to talk about that in chapter 6 and chapter 7. The gates were important to the safety of the people and the control of who went in and out of the city. In and out of the city. Then his people, and then in Psalms 87:2 it says, "The Lord loves the gates of Zion." Locks and bars are mentioned 5 times. Nehemiah 3:3, 3:6, 3:13, and 3:13 through 15. Locks refer to the sockets into which the bars were fitted, thus making it difficult for anyone outside to open the gates. It isn't enough that we simply do the work of God. We must also make sure that what we do is protected from the enemy. 2 John verse 8 says, "Watch out that you do not lose what you have worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully." So as we get acquainted with the various people mentioned in Nehemiah 3, you will find yourself saying, this is just like the church today, and we're going to find some similarities as we go along here. Circumstances change, but human nature remains pretty much the same. Kind of like around here a few years ago when we lost the church to the fire. Everybody gathered around, and I mean, we didn't do it to work ourselves, but it was it didn't take long for us to rebuild with the support of all of us. Yes.
Go back to that slide, his diagram. I got something that I found that
Okay, this was the next one, which is, this is going to repeat several times because as I move around the story,
okay,
I'm going to circle, but,
forget the big wall that goes all the way around, but only the later one that has the whole peninsula coming down.
yep,
There's a Bible Logos program that's actually put together a 3D version of what that would have looked like. And I found it on a couple other sources that say the same thing. That temple occupied that entire big area at the top. Almost the entire thing was occupied.
The
In
big-
other words, where you see B, C, D, F, E, that whole area right there would have been the temple.
That's the Temple Mount.
That was the temple then.
okay.
Okay.
That's,
I mean, it's like, there's not very much walk-around room in there either. I mean, it goes up fairly close to those walls.
so that's probably why they didn't describe it, because it was, I mean, why they didn't. So those B, C, D, E, and F were places in the temple then?
It would, or on the fringes of that temple, I don't know where.
Okay.
That little box between B and C, that looks like it's probably, on one of the pictures I looked at, it's possibly the altar. Although one of the other pictures say that it goes over so much farther that piece right there would have to be incorporated into the temple. So I don't know exactly the size of the temple, but it occupied almost that whole area up there.
Okay.
The lower area, that's called the City of David, is that correct?
Actually, those stairs at the bottom, it says go up to the city of David. So that's not the city of David. The city of David would be south, below that. Yeah, the stairs descending from the city of David.
Okay.
So is the city of David then where the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers are?
No, it's
Oh,
below
it's
that.
south, it's below, oh, below that even?
Yes,
Okay.
look at the very, very bottom note that says,
Yeah.
stairs descending from city of David. City of David isn't even on, I mean, it's below what's on the screen.
Below?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, it says stairs descending, but then if you get up closer, you can see there's like dashes, a circle of dashes. It doesn't really identify where it is. Because if you're descending from, that means you've come down from, right? So wouldn't it
The City of
be,
David was inside the old gates.
yeah, I'm thinking it was, I don't have a, is this thing, okay, so, oh, it doesn't,
I'm not sure.
Okay.
this pointer doesn't work out there. But there's a, right at the bottom, can you see it, that little circle,
Yeah, yeah.
the dashes? I'm thinking that might be, because it says stairs descending from, that means it's coming down, isn't it?
Think
So
so.
the city of David would be,
The city was in the higher,
okay,
because again, these are hills.
give me something, you'll give me,
Okay, I think I was reading that wrong. I found another one totally different.
okay,
It says that, yes, that whole peninsula down there was the city of David,
okay,
that bottom peninsula. So the stairs descending from might be ones going out of the city down rather than I was thinking they were going from the city down into that area. So yes, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
that's all city of David,
city of David.
okay,
And the City of David was called that because when David captured Jerusalem, it was really, really small. There wasn't just a whole lot. That was the original town. And it was very small, and that's a very small area down there. The city then developed to the north, like it is today. But there's something else that, on the Temple Mount was actually 2 hills. And they filled in that there are large open areas down there where the temple is, where they used to have water. And when I say water, I mean like 100,000 gallons of water down there that they could bring up to use in the temple to clean the temple area. Because there was areas that was rock that they could cover over, and they had natural caverns down there. And those caverns are generally shut off, but at times, people can go in and see them, and they're not full, most of them are not full of water anymore. There is still some water down there.
You've been there, right?
No.
Oh,
My sister did, and my mom and dad
Oh,
did.
okay. From your conversation, I almost
Well,
thought you
I
had
read
been
a lot
there, but
about
you've
it.
done a lot more studying then.
But they actually filled in between two hills to make the area that is today the Temple Mount.
Okay.
It was a major thing of building it up to be that big a flat area, which is what they have today. But it was down there.
Okay.
The original city of David was really very small.
Give the genius here just a second, he's gonna show you on the screen. Probably the best rendition I've found.
Well, I appreciate all this help I'm getting. While we're waiting for that, so God uses all kinds of people. This chapter 3, mentions rulers and priests in verse 1 and also 12 through 19. Men and women in verse 12, professional craftsmen in verse 8 and 32, and even people from outside the city in verses 2, 5, and 7. There was a place for everyone and a job for everyone to do. And it's 1:45. If we get that up, next week we'll pick up reading chapter 3, verse 1. We'll see if Aaron can get that picture up there, because it's, well, I appreciate all the input this morning. Maybe we won't.